Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Janet Tarantino, and she's going to tell us about her near-death experience. Thank you for reminding me we had this today because I totally forgot. So I apologize again for that.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Okay, so let me tell you, actually, first, let me say thank you for having me here today. I was thrilled when I got your message and inviting me. Talking about my experiences and anything spiritual are my favorite subjects.
Me too.
So before I get started, I had 3 near-death experiences, and I've had other supernatural experiences too. And I would like to invite the listeners to feel free to substitute their own terminology because it's important that no one be left out. I say this because the details of what I saw and experienced can be found and described in many belief systems. However, they use different terminology. And I would also like to mention that the God I know is not a specific gender. It instead is genderless. However, since my parents followed the Christian tradition, I often refer to the creator as a he, because describing the creator as an it just doesn't seem personal enough to me. So please give me a little leeway with my terminology and use your own. Now let's get to it. One of the key moments of my life was when I was pre-kindergarten age, but this was not an NDE. On this specific day, I was at home with my mom and I was bored because everyone else was at school and I didn't have anyone to play with. Mom was on the phone talking with a friend about adoption, so I was kind of overhearing her conversation. When she hung up the telephone, I asked my mom if I was adopted, and she answered my question with, "No, silly, you're our little girl." And she was kind of amused by that question. I took that as my answer, but I will never forget the next thing that came out of my mouth. I told my mom, "Well, okay, but I'm going to die young." Well, as you can imagine, my mom's expression went from amused to, let's just say, upset. She exclaimed, "Quit talking like that." Since I was so young, I had no concept of age. So I stood there contemplating what young meant, and I saw 3 images quickly flash before me. It seemed to take up the entire consciousness of my vision, whether it was right in front of me or if it was in my mind or what, it just took up everything in front of me. And what I did not know at the time was that these visions were of me at different ages and proved to be the ages I was scheduled to have my 3 NDEs. Later, my life evolved and more happened, and I came to know at pre-kindergarten age what I had seen was pages of my own book of life. Now let's go to the snapshot of my first NDE. It occurred when I was 15 and I had become very ill a few days after a picnic at a popular park with our larger family, cousins, aunts, and uncles, etc. Was it food poisoning? No, because it would have hit me immediately, not days later. However, a couple of weeks later, my mom heard on the news there was E. coli discovered in the water at the park the day we were there. Was it E. coli? Possibly, because I loved water, but I don't specifically remember if I went swimming or played in the water, so I will never know for sure. In any case, I had gotten very sick, so my mom removed my sister Diane from the room we shared, so she, my mom, could sleep in bed with me to take care of me. One night, with my mom still lying beside me, monitoring how I was doing, I woke and stood, look upward at the ceiling light that had been turned off for the night. I could smell, the sweet and sour smell of sickness and the edges of death because I was so ill. And I felt like death warmed over. Still lying in bed, I had a strange feeling and a buzzing sensation, and I felt dizzy. Suddenly, I just had a strange sensation of falling backwards, but not only falling backwards, I felt as if I had fallen through the depth of the mattress. However, it was not my physical body that had fallen, since my body was still motionless in bed. It instead was my spirit that had fallen backwards, exiting out of my body by going through the mattress. Then in spirit form, I looked upward again and saw everything above me spinning to the right, like the hands on a clock that turned it as the time ticked by. But the spinning hands of the clock spun so fast that it looked like the blades of a fast turning fan. Suddenly the spinning motion swiftly stopped and revealed that the entire ceiling and everything above me had transformed into a mass of mildly bubbling white clouds. Shortly after the ceiling turned to white puffy clouds, I saw two different spinning motions within the banks of the clouds that quickly created two separate tunnels to two other worlds. When I peered through the tunnel to the left of me, because that's the first one that opened, I saw a sumo wrestler with a top knot in his hair, dressed in all in white, in a white room, surrounded in a radiant white light, a lot of whites there. And all he did was watch me. No matter how he moved, he kept his eyes locked on me, watching. After observing the sumo wrestler for a short time, I heard the most beautiful music coming from the other tunnel that was to the right of me. So my attention was drawn there. That's when I saw a stunning young woman with long, thick, almost black hair swished down into the opening, and she seemed to have come riding in on the most glorious music I have ever heard. If I had to describe the music, it sounded like a choir of angels singing songs of praise and worship. And at the time when I saw her, the girl, I thought of her as Daddy's little girl and music box lady, because I was only 15, and in those were the only things I could associate her with at that my time in my life. When I was young, there was no internet and only 3 channels on television. So I wasn't subject to the creativity of our current time. So the music box lady and Daddy's little girl was what I could compare it to. The main programs on television were the Carol Burnett Show, Bonanza, and similar shows like that, not the wild and crazy programming of television today. Now, after the music box lady made her entrance, she started communicating with the sumo wrestler. I knew they were discussing something, but I could not hear what they were saying, as they were talking telepathically, and I wasn't included in the conversation. More occurred, but what I want to share is that when their discussion ended, the two beings magically transformed into glowing orbs of light and left the room. That's when I settled back into my body and immediately ran for the bathroom to throw up. Now, afterward, I discounted what happened and put the sumo wrestler and the music box lady experience behind me, but I never forgot that. Years later, after reading the Bible, I came to find out the sumo wrestler is what the Bible refers to as a watcher or observer angel. And these types of angels are also referred to as our master guide, who protects and guides us. The music box lady, who I also thought of Daddy's little girl, was my daughter, who was not going to be born until 15 years later. And if I had died that night, she would not have been born in the future. And obviously, I had an agreement to be her mother. And on some level, I must have been aware of the contract because of my thought that she was Daddy's little girl. Now, the second NDE happened. These things were so far apart, I couldn't connect them, but they connect and create a much bigger, beautiful picture. And so the second NDE happened, I believe, when I was 38 years old, when I was involved in a severe car accident, and I was saved by divine intervention. That accident pushed the door to my awareness open, so I could no longer discount the unusual experiences so easily and the presence of invisible beings around us. I call this accident the catalyst to the ultimate ambush makeover. At the time, I was working in my longtime career as a network coordinator for a major corporation, and I was a single mom with 3 children. My parents lived over 800 miles away and did not get to see their grandchildren very much, or at least as much as they would like. So they asked if they could have the children for a month while they were on summer break, and I only needed to get them there. After delivering the children, I returned home in time to have a weekend to myself before I had to return to work on Monday. When I looked out at my backyard deck, I wanted to decorate it with pots of lovely flowers, and I did it every year, and I wanted it to look nice for the kids when they came home. Looking forward to my day of planting, because I really enjoyed it, I made out a list of everything and headed out the door. After making my purchases, I pulled my car out of the nursery's parking lot and headed toward home. There was virtually no traffic at the time because it was the middle of the day and it was a work day. And there were 3 lanes going in each direction, and the cars going in my direction were far enough away that they were of no concern. I pulled out into the nearest lane and headed toward home, soon maneuvering my car into the middle lane, and stopped in the nearby traffic light that had cycled to red. When the light changed, I pulled through the intersection and started down a large dip in the road that was there. That's just the way that the road was shaped. And that's when I noticed I was catching up to a car in front of me faster than I should. And it was in the same lane I was in, but I wasn't speeding. I quickly realized that car ahead of me that had stopped at the bottom of the hill in the middle lane, like I said, the same lane that I was in. The odd thing was there was no reason for a car to be stopped there. There wasn't a light, a cross street, or a crosswalk located there. So I quickly analyzed the situation because my career was all analyzation. That's what I did since I was a network coordinator. And I noticed a park on the left side of the road, and I was worried about the possibility of a child in front of that car and what direction they might be going. So I chose to stop behind the vehicle because I could have gone on either side of him. There was 3 lanes there. Immediately when I stopped, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and I noticed the light at the top of the hill had cycled, and a mass of cars was now racing down the hill toward us. All the lanes were filled, and I knew no one could deviate from their lane, and the speed zone in that area was approximately 45 to 50 miles an hour, so they were moving fast. My eyes were fixed on the driver in the pickup truck who was behind me. Same lane I was in. He was looking to the right, and he didn't see we were stopped. I instantly knew he was going to hit me. Then I had the thought about my seatbelt. I had not buckled it yet. I had planned on latching it on my way home, but I had not driven far. It was only like a block and a half from the flower nursery, and I hadn't buckled it at that point. And I knew there was no time to secure it, at that point. That's when in my mind, I screamed out in desperation, "Oh no, oh God, he's going to hit me." Instantaneously, I heard a voice that said, "Lay down across the seat and cover your face." I didn't have time to think about it, so I did as I was told. The strange thing is that I was the only person in the car. So where was the voice coming from? As the accident unfolded, at one point I felt the arms of an invisible being pick me up like a child. One arm under my other arms and one arm under my knees, just like a dad would pick up a child. And God had obviously heard my call and sent me help. After being picked up, I found myself looking down on the accident from above through a hole in the cloud, even though it was a cloudless day. The cloud I was looking through was obviously the veil that separates one dimension from another. It's kind of similar to the clouds in my first NDE, where it opened up to show 2 other worlds. Only this one, I was on the other side of the clouds looking into this world. While in the other dimension, I knew I was not alone because I could feel the touch of celestial beings' hands on my elbows. Unlike the first ND, like I said, I was in another dimension looking back into this one. I give extensive details about the collision and what happened in my book, Dying to See It, and also include the pictures of all my NDs that I drew and other things that are important to my story. And even though my body had been tossed around the car that day and I should have been a fatality, I was released to go home later that afternoon when I could arrange for a friend to come pick me up. The odd thing is that I do not remember the ambulance ride, because I do remember them getting me out of the car and putting me on a board, and putting me in the ambulance, but I don't remember the ambulance ride, nor do I remember being checked at the hospital in the emergency room, or talking to any doctors or nurses. I don't remember because nobody was home in my body until later that afternoon. So after making notes about what I saw and what occurred during the collision, I was studying the pictures of my car because I had my friend pick me up, and we went, first thing we did is went over to the dealership where they had towed my car so that I could see my car, and I could also rent another vehicle to get to work, you know, and to travel around, because that was the only car. And that's when I noticed that the window I saw shattering was the rear window, not the front window where I had laid down across the seat, covered my face. The front windshield was still intact, and that's why I know my body had been tossed around the car that day. At the time, though, I didn't realize it. Afterwards, I knew what happened, but who was going to believe me? So I stayed silent again and carried on. After this ND, though, following a scripture holds significant meaning to me, and it's Psalm 15, and it's Psalm 50, 15. Call to me in times of trouble, and I will save you, and you will honor me. Now, let's move the clock forward to my third ND for a snapshot of that. I had gotten married to a man named Gavin, who loved the country life. So we purchased a ranch and moved to our home in the country that was close enough where we could commute to work. One fall season, I had developed an allergy that I had never had before. I thought it would go away as the season changed, but it did not. At the end of the day, I would go inside and take decongestants to clear up my sinuses, but one night the congestion was extremely bad. That night I went to bed and propped pillows up on top of each other, 3 of them, so I could breathe better. I felt like if I was at a 45-degree angle, I could breathe better. And I always sleep with my hands on my back with my hands over my tummy. During the night, my chest started to hurt because my breathing had been cut off. The congestion was so bad. I also didn't have enough energy to sit up and gasp for air. I reached for my husband to get help, but I could not feel him. In desperation, I called out to him and I yelled, "Gavin, help me, please help me." But he continued to sleep. Suddenly, without effort, I found myself out of my body and I felt like I had been set free. I felt like I had taken the biggest, freshest breath of air that I'd ever taken, and I felt magnificent. The atmosphere I found myself floating in was an incredible velvety darkness of unconditional peace, love, and tranquility. And I was instantly connected with the universal consciousness. That is when I knew everything was as it should be. I could see my husband and me lying in bed below. When I looked down on my body, I knew I was dead, and I was surprised about how I looked from this perspective of out of my body. And I noticed my hands were still over my tummy. So I unquestionably know it was my spirit arm that had reached for Gavin, and it was my spirit voice that had called for him. And that's why he didn't respond, because he couldn't hear me. I looked around. I noticed somewhere around the ceiling, I was floating around ceiling height. Eventually, I moved higher to a point where I noticed the ceiling was no longer there and it melted away. Then later I moved higher to a point outside the house where I saw the roof of the house had melted away and I could see the entire insides of the house and the outside too. At this time, I felt I was floating face up in an immense pool of love. And that was the perfect temperature, not cool, not warm. It was simply perfection. And I could feel my energetic arms elongated and out to my sides. They were elongated because they were no longer encapsulated in my physical body. I also saw a silver cord float by in front of me and slightly above me, and from left to right in an atmosphere that had no gravity. When I saw the silver cord float by, I noticed a ball of light approaching in a slight S-shaped curve off to my right. But while the light approached, I was more interested in what was happening with my physical body that was lying in bed below. I was interested because I noticed something lifting out of my physical legs. What I saw was a shimmering blue energy, the color of the sky on a beautiful day. It was floating up out of my feet, then my shins, then up out of my thighs. When the blue energy totally escaped my body, I could feel it drawing up toward me. It drew up toward me because I was the energetic consciousness that had already left the upper part of my body, and I had just watched the remainder of my blue spirit body exiting the lower half of my body. I, in spirit, had stretched to escape my physical form. Now, somehow, because I was connected to the universal consciousness, I knew that this was my own slice of the creator spirit, known as the Holy Spirit, or for some, they simply call it spirit or soul. And that's why Source says he lives with us and experiences life with us, because he really does. Our energetic consciousness is our personal slice of God's spirit. And when the blue energy floated up to me, I became whole again, morphing into a shape of an orb, just like the orbs that came to my room when I was 15, or left my room when I was 15. And the orb, and I was now sitting in a wand, and and it was made of cushy, unconditional love. This wand effect was God's way of connecting this NDE back to songs I sang at the Pepsi Center 2 years previously. I was singing at an event and praying using the words of the songs, even though I did not realize I was doing this. However, now I'm glad that was the case. Some of the songs that are significant are He Touched Me and He Touches Me, Breathe Upon Me, Breath of God, and Holy Spirit, Thou art welcome here. But there were others too. To summarize the night of the Pepsi Event Center, I was singing and praying to God, to Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. And during the third NDE, all three of the superpowers come together during my NDE, and the wand is the symbolic gesture that God used to call my attention back to the songs I sang that evening. So after my spirit body had drawn up toward me and I transformed into a new shape, I knew this metamorphosis took place because I could sense my shape changing. I could feel my energetic arms that had been floating out to my sides pull in, and they folded into my body, and my spirit legs pulled up as I morphed into the shape of an orb that glowed, just like the radiant light that was zooming toward my room. I also had my vision go through a fishbowl effect for an instant until the transformation was complete. Then my sight became crystal clear. What amazed me was that after I was out of my body, I no longer needed the glasses I so badly needed. I had to feel for them in the morning because my vision was so bad until I got my contacts in. And I was healed from everything that ailed me, and that includes any feelings of unworthiness. And I find it incredible that several of the songs I sang 2 years early at the Pepsi Center Event Center also called for healing in my soul during that third NDE. And that is what they did that night. They also healed my soul. Suddenly, that tiny glowing light that has been coming from the distance off to my right zipped into where I was and stopped in front of me, promptly growing and changing into the most incredible heavenly light being that was infused with light and had light rays coming out of its heart center. Initially, I could see the light being's hair, the shape of its face, and its clothing, but I could not see its face clearly because its facial features clearly because the rays of light were obscuring my view. So its identity initially was hidden. However, during another incredible experience, Jesus revealed this light being was him. The light being, who is Jesus, already knew who I was, and he loved me regardless of my successes or failures. He loved me just for existing, just like he does all of us. He had brown hair down his shoulders with wisps of hair gently blowing across his chin due to a breeze I could not feel, but I could see due to the movement of his hair. I was in awe of who I was seeing and couldn't speak because I felt I could burst from the exchange of love between us. In the meantime, I noticed a second ball of light coming through the darkness off to my left. But I turned my focus back to Jesus because I detected motion there. He had held his right hand out to me, palm up, in a gesture of come take my hand. Then he said, "It's time to come home, Jan." When he told me it was my time to go, I thought about my daughter, Gina, and I wondered how she'd take my death. But my thought was answered without having to ask. Jesus told me she'll be okay. Suddenly, the second light was approaching from the left, grew bigger, and was now beside Jesus. And I could see clouds bubbling around the edges of this glowing light, but this brilliant energy was actually alive. This magnificent force was the creator in all of his essence, and the love coming from this light was untainted, unconditional in every way. The strange thing is that even though the light seemed to be white, I could feel and sense the rays of magnificent colors coming out of it. That's when God reached out his rainbow arms and he embraced me. He told me I was perfect in every way. And while he held me, he showed me many moving moments of my life and told me, understand these moments, they matter. Some of the moments I recognized because they happened, but some I did not because they had not happened yet. As you can imagine, I did not want to go back to my body, but God had other plans for me. He wanted me to stay on earth, but he was going to give me a choice. That's when the angels came for me. And that's when I morphed from the shape of an orb into a white translucent form of a person. I could feel the touch of the angels' hands on my arms above the elbows, and they took me high into the sky. That's when I became one with the universe and was shown the immediate future of what would happen to me and my husband if I chose to go to heaven. But no matter what I was shown, I still wanted to go. Now, this change of forms, if I don't mention it later, but this indicates that our spirit can change forms. It can change from a spirit orb into a shape of a person. So we must not, put spirit into a box because they can morph into whatever they desire. Suddenly I was back before God's light, just on the precipice of going into the light and joining him when I was shown one more image that was important to me. And that image was of my middle child, Kurt. And somehow, just by simply looking at his face, I knew something was going to happen to him in the future if I wasn't there to support him. He would go down a pathway that would not be so good for him. Now, how would I know this? Unless it was planned. I must have had some kind of agreement with Kurt to be there for him. Again, we have agreements with other spirits, and no matter where or how the lessons manifest, we'll find a way to come together. That's when I made the decision to stay, and I told Jesus I'm not ready to go yet. Jesus smiled and nodded his head, and that's when I turned back into the blue spirit body, and I sat my spirit butt down in Jan's body. I slipped a spirit foot into each of her physical feet, but not completely. Then I put my spirit hands on my spirit knees and rocked back and forth in Jan's body until its consciousness, could get up enough momentum to lay down, snap back in, and help Jan sit up and gasp for air. All the while I re-entered my body, I heard a voice from heaven echoing over and over again until I completely re-entered it. The echoing message is not only for me, but for everyone. And that voice kept repeating this message: love is the only thing that matters. Needless to say, Jan was able to sit up and gasp for air. And then she had to live her life wondering when the other shoe was going to drop for her son, Kurt. After this experience, I noticed some of the mini movie moments God wanted me to understand that had not happened yet started to play out. Not all the mini movie moments have occurred. I mean, now that all the mini movies have occurred and are shared, I share them along with the deeper meaning and the detail in my book. Why? Because God revealed to me that I would be writing a book, and he told me to make the book about him. Then he showed me writing a book and talking about it. That is why Dying to See, revelation about God, Jesus, our pathway, and the nature of the soul came to be. The Creator gave me this task because he wants everyone to understand the revelations of what I learned are relevant and helpful to everyone. So when you read my story, it's in its entirety. Please associate my story to your life, because what I learned is valid for everyone. And I must say, after seeing that my spirit was a stunning, shimmering blue color of a magnificent day, I often look up at the sky, and when there is no clouds, of course, and wonder if the sky is the earth spirit, and we only think it's simply atmosphere. To share some of what I learned, I can say we all have our own purposes in life, and they are unique to each of us. But the primary reason we are in this world is to learn to love, share our love, and to encourage others to do the same. I was also shown we have a tendency to set up our own limitations, and God knows we can do more. So drop those self-imposed limitations and take baby steps to where you want to be, and realize that if something does not occur, it's because God has something better for you. We only need to take steps to where our heavenly help guides us so we can discover what God has laid out for us. But God provides help and clues for us to find. We only need to discover them. I can undoubtedly say the core of our being is love. And unfortunately, our innate purpose of love gets lost in society far too easily as we let outside forces alter our true nature. So just think about this. There is not one baby out there that was born not wanting to be loved and not wanting to love someone else or to be loved. It is the negative forces that create the mayhem and disorder. So we must always make sure we are not part of the problem. Instead, we should always be a part of the sharing our love process. Sometimes, in order to be a positive force, we have to shed or block negative people from our life, or block those outside forces that are disrupting our state of being. And maybe it's turning the radio off or turning the television off for a while, so we can get back to our true nature, core nature of love, especially since the echoing voice from heaven said love is the only thing that matters. Other revelations include we choose what we would like to learn and the difficulties we encounter. Part of the learning process is how we react and handle a situation. It is also imperative not only to learn the lesson, but it's important to implement the learning so we can overcome the struggle. Only then can we check that lesson off and as it being completed and be proud of what we've accomplished. And even though we may choose what we want to experience and learn in life, it is a council of high spiritual beings who lay out how our lessons will manifest. It is up to us to grasp the learning. Regarding our spirit-chosen lesson plans, I came to understand through my experiences that once we are born, we are not privy to what we have chosen to embrace or assist with, nor do we keep the knowledge of the soul contracts we have made pre-birth. If we remember the planning, we would not have anything to learn. So it is my hope that listeners of this program or readers of my book come to understand that before we are born, we make arrangements with other spirits, either by playing a significant role, as I did with my daughter Gina and my middle child Kurt, or as another person who was involved, and that's Bob, who the council of high spiritual beings made known was brought into my life for a special lesson. And that lesson was not for me, it was for him too. Now he came from Europe. Can you imagine how much organization it took for them to bring the two of us together in the way that they did? And I also suggest everyone look at their life differently to discover who their life is playing significant roles and are not in the forces of, should I just moved? Our life are planned. I made my notes here. But anyway, look at the people in your life and discover who the people are that you're having soul contracts with. What did they play? What did they play in your life? Was it a negative force, a positive force? And what would you wish that would happen differently? And if with those wishes, implement those wishes into your own life so that the negative forces that happen to you are not carried forward. And I can also say, those certain moments of our life are planned, like my NDEs and these moments that happened. Not everything is preset to occur. God specifically said moments, not seconds. But our free will choices determine where we go and what we learn, or if we learn at all. If I had not let Bob into my life as the council had organized, I might not have learned the lesson that they organized for us, or I might have bypassed it. That lesson, or I may not have learned it in such a pleasant way. I am often asked, why do bad things happen? If God exists, why do bad things happen? I'd like the listeners to consider what sticks out most in your mind. Is it the easy times or the difficult and embarrassing times that stick out? I have no doubt their answers will be the difficult or embarrassing times, because those are where the most growth can be achieved. With that in mind, God does not promise us an easy life, because we have free will and we are allowed to make bad decisions too. Growth can be achieved through bad choices and bad situations that we learn to overcome. Now, just think of this. While I was out of my body, I still had my thoughts. I still had the memories of who I was in my body, because I thought of my daughter. I knew who my son was. This tells us that our consciousness is the real us, and it is housed within the spirit, not the brain. The brain is, shall we say, the motherboard that operates the physical body, that is our soul that looks through the eyes of this person who we are. So it is my spirit that is talking to you. It is your spirit that is listening to me. This body is our temporary clothing, and we chose it too. I can also confirm that each of us has a slice of the Creator Spirit inside of us, and it is what we commonly know as spirit or soul. It is through the Spirit, our slice of the Creator Spirit, that all three aspects of the Super Creator, who are one larger force of God, that live life and experience life with us. And that's not to mention the angelic watcher, who guides and protects us too. All of this shows that we are never alone. I find it interesting that in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it defines the soul as the seat of one's deepest thoughts and emotions, which supports what I'm saying. And also it defines spirit as an immaterial force within a human being, thought to have a body, thought to give the body life and energy and power. And also the dictionary mentioned it is believed that the spirit is superior to the body, which it is. And the definition relates the word spirit to the word life and vitality. Again, this supports my story, because bottom line, the spirit is what gives the energy, this physical body, to move forward in life. And once the body ceases to function, the spirit withdraws and goes home to heaven who made it. Now, I must say, after the third NDE, where I morphed into the shape of an orb, and with the spiritual beings coming and going as glowing light orbs as well, I can easily tell everyone I find orbs in photos very fascinating and meaningful. So do not discount them so easily. Put orb photos in a special file, and over time you will see where they're usually located at, and you may come to know if an orb is your angelic guide, another high spiritual being who's guiding you, or a deceased loved one. There's so many things there that, or could simply be an angel. You'll know. And I hope my story gives everyone who hears it some sense of peace in knowing God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, angels, and other high spiritual beings are real and will give you a new view of life and how we should live if you take this story into consideration. Now, as I end my account of what happened and what I learned, I would like to ask everyone to go to sleep each night and wake up each day with a sense of wonder on where God will lead us, or who he will put in our pathway for us to help or learn from, because life here is the greatest adventure and honor filled with angelic help that we'll ever have. And always remember what the main message is that the Creator gave me to dispatch and bring back. Love is the only thing that matters, and that's how we should live our life. Peggy, thank you so much for inviting me to share, because I always enjoy sharing my story, because it's good news. It's good news because we never die.
You told that so well.
No, thank you.
Very articulate. So I'm kind of speechless because you just covered everything. The only thing really I'm curious about is, when did you put all this together? Was it an aha moment, or did you connected the dots between the NDEs, or was it a continuum?
After God showed me that I had to write the book, I sat down and started writing a timeline of all the moments. And so basically, when I created my book, created from these moments I was shown, and I saw how they tied together and created a much larger, more fantastic, beautiful picture of how he organizes our life and gives us help. And that's when I realized that what I saw at pre-kindergarten age was the flashes of the book of life. And what I saw during the third NDE was more pages of my book of life. And it was those moments that were planned. It was not all the moments in between, but those moments would have happened no matter what direction I would have gone. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jan. And I apologize again that I totally forgot about this morning. And I'm glad I was sitting by my phone when you messaged me, because it could have been somewhere else. So,
okay. Well, I'm going to think it's a hoot when I compare what I wrote to my book of life, see how close I got when I get there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Sure. My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.